Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video. Welcome if you're new. Today I thought I would make a loaf of sourdough bread with you, and this is an artisan loaf. It's a crusty outside and soft inside, and this is one of the loaves that I've really enjoyed baking. Now my sourdough starter was in the refrigerator, and it was in there because if you're not new around here, then you already know it. We've been in the process of trying to get moved into our house, and so I had put it in the refrigerator just so I wouldn't have to feed it every day and I wouldn't have to be baking every day. And I was just going to pull out enough for the recipe and then feed the remainder and put it back in the refrigerator. But I decided I wanted to go ahead and clean my jar. So I ended up taking all of my starter out and then putting back in just a little bit and feeding it because my jar, it was just needing a cleaning. Don't clean it often, but it was time. Now, if you watched me make my sourdough starter, you know that I did not have a scale, and you can absolutely do this without a scale. You're just looking for about equal parts of starter flour and water, just a thick pancake batter consistency, but it sure does help having this scale. I really enjoy using it, and I did 100 grams of starter, 100 grams of all-purpose unbleached flour, and 100 grams of water. Now you want to use, for your bread baking, and the reason why I'm showing this whole process here, for your bread baking you want to use a starter that is nice and bubbly and ready to go, a starter that has been fed and has used that food to create beautiful bubbles, lots of yeast, lots of good bacteria. So my starter needed to be fed. If you've had yours on the counter and you're feeding it and it's bubbly and already ready to go, obviously you don't have to do this part, but I'm actually doing this the night before so that it has several hours to use that food to get bubbly for me. So I'm going to go ahead and feed it. I'm going to lightly cover it and sit it on the counter, not back in the refrigerator. I'm going to go ahead and sit it on the counter overnight, and then it will be ready for me to bake with it in the morning. I will be sure to link my sourdough starter video for you in case you don't have a starter to use. That will show you how you can get one ready for all your sourdough baking needs. I will try to remember to link it in the cards and down in the description box. Here is the consistency that I was talking about, a thick pancake batter. Like I mentioned in that sourdough starter video, to me, it reminds me a lot of cornbread batter. I don't always do this, but for the sake of this video, we decided to mark the side of the jar so that tomorrow you can see how much it has risen. Here it is the next morning. It's a little bit difficult to tell in this jar where it's spread out. If this was in like a quart mason jar, you'd be able to tell a lot better. But last night, this starter was down at the bottom below that black line right there. So it has doubled overnight. It's nice and bubbly, smells delicious, and it's ready to bake with. So I'm gonna get out everything that I need. I need some more of my all-purpose unbleached flour. I need 1 1/4 cup of water. Now you either want to use filtered water. If you have tap water that's chlorinated, you want to get that out a couple of hours before and let it sit on the counter and degas. It's very easy to use tap water for sourdough, but you do want to let it sit out a few hours if it's chlorinated, because that chlorine kills bacteria, and that includes the good bacteria and the yeast. So if you use tap water, and if you have chlorinated tap water, let it sit out on the counter for a few hours before you use it, or use filtered water. Now I'm getting ready to make my bread. Very easy recipe, y'all. I don't even use a scale for this particular recipe. It's very forgiving. I was telling Justin he was leaving for work. It's very forgiving. It has always turned out really well for me. So a 1/2 cup of starter, 1 1/4 cups of water. I do go ahead and kind of work that starter into the water a little bit. Now I'm putting in 3 cups of that all-purpose unbleached flour. Again, very forgiving recipe. I'm just measuring it out the best that I can, and that's what I've always done, and it's always worked out well. I've also experimented with adding the salt in now and waiting till later, and I've not really seen a difference, so I go ahead and put in about a teaspoon of salt. And I lost some of the footage here, but it's going to be a very shaggy looking dough at this point. Don't try to overwork it. It needs a little time for the flour to soak up the moisture from the water. That's how flour works. It doesn't absorb it right away. So you're going to cover it and let it sit somewhere for about 30 minutes, and then we'll come back to it. During that time, I went ahead and fed my starter again so that I could put it back in the refrigerator until I wanted to use it the next time. After about 30 minutes or so, you're going to come back to your dough, and it's going to have absorbed some more of that water the flour will have. And at this point, you just want to kind of stretch it. I don't get real technical about this right here, folks. I just pull it up, stretch it, fold it over, stretch it, fold it over a couple of times, and then I do a tucking motion to create a dough ball. So I'm stretching and folding a couple times, and now here you can see just kind of rolling it over on itself and tucking it in the bottom to create a ball of dough. We're going to set it back in our bowl, cover it, put it somewhere warm, not hot, just warm. And at this point, sometimes I don't come back to it for another 6 or 7 hours. If I'm where I can, and if I think about it, I come back in another 30 minutes and do that folding one more time. That's what I'm going to do here. Just going to stretch it, fold it, stretch it, fold it, and then create that ball again. If you don't do it, it still has always turned out okay for me. But if I think about it, I go ahead and do this that second time. After I've done a few stretch and folds, I tuck it back into that neat little ball, put it back in the bowl, cover it with a towel, and just let it be for 6 to 8 hours. You want it to about double in size depending on what I've got going on, depending on when we need the bread. I will go about 6 to 8 hours. Now that bowl you just saw me push off to the side, this is later that night. I say night. This was around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That bowl that I pushed to the side was a bowl that was lined with a tea towel that was floured. I'm going to, and I'm not punching down my dough here. I know it kind of looks like that, but I'm just using my hand to scrape under it. And I'm going to put it out on the counter. I do not flour my counter. It doesn't really need it. You want it to stick to it just a little so that in just a minute you'll be able to get some traction. You'll see what I'm talking about. I just kind of pull it out into a rectangle, and then I fold it on itself twice. That's just what I have found that I like to do. I tuck it back into that ball, and then I use the counter and kind of push and pull and push and pull, and you will see it creating tension across the top of your dough ball. Here's a little bit closer look for you. But it's just creating tension across the top of the ball of dough and making it nice and neat and tight. And then you're going to take that dough ball, put it upside down in that floured towel bowl, and you're going to very lightly cover it with a towel, and you're going to let it sit for about 2 more hours. Again, it really just depends on when I need it for supper. Sometimes I let it sit for about 1.5 hours, sometimes up to 2.5 hours. Now I am getting my Dutch oven ready. My oven is preheated. I preheated my oven to 425. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. I think next time I will do 450. This was my first time making this bread in our new home and in our new oven. There's what my bread dough is looking like. I'm going to go ahead and turn it out on a piece of parchment paper. In that Dutch oven that I was getting ready, I sprinkled just a little bit of cornmeal on the bottom, and that keeps your bread from sitting right on the bottom of the Dutch oven, and it helps avoid a really black bottom. You want a crusty bottom. This is a crusty recipe for bread, but you don't want it black and burnt. I don't know, maybe you do, but that's what the cornmeal is for. Now, this is the first time I ever used a razor blade to try to get a little fancy, and I still have a lot of work to do if that's what I want to do with my bread. But I have in the past just done 3 slashes across the top just with a kitchen knife. I have done an X across the top. That's probably my favorite so far, is that X. And you just want something for the bread to be able to expand. It's going to expand. If you cut those slashes in there, it expands where you want it to instead of just busting out the side. I put that parchment paper over in my Dutch oven, and I'm going to put that into my oven. Like I said, 425. Next time I think I'll do 450, just because my oven, this new oven, doesn't cook quite as hot as the old oven that I was using. Another little trick to keep the bottom of your bread from getting too dark is to put a piece of aluminum foil on the shelf under your Dutch oven. I'm going to let it go covered for 30 minutes. Then we're going to come back and take the lid off and let it go for another 20 minutes. I always love seeing the bread when you take the lid off for the first time. Now, if you don't have a Dutch oven, you could do this on a baking sheet. You could do it in a cast iron skillet, but I think the Dutch oven really does make a difference. After 20 minutes, I'm taking it out. Now, my bread didn't get quite as burnt. Don't get me wrong, it was delicious. It was crusty on the outside, nice and soft on the inside, and it was delicious. But next time, I think I'll move it on up to about 450, or leave it in for about 5 minutes longer and let it get a little more brown on the top. See how the bottom was nice and brown but not burned? That's what that cornmeal does for you. Now, I couldn't wait. This bread, y'all, was piping hot, but I had to cut into it because there is just nothing like a warm piece of sourdough bread. Let's take a peek at the inside, shall we? Look at that steam. I'm telling y'all, it was hot right out the oven, and I was wanting some of that bread. If you can be patient and let it cool off just a minute, I'm sure it would make it a lot easier to cut. And there you have it, a nice, crusty, artisan loaf of sourdough bread. Thank y'all for spending a little time with me today. I love you. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, y'all.